Reclaim your mornings with the Sway, the original heatless hair curling ribbon from Maine Label Hair Co. As busy moms and entrepreneurs who each run their own businesses, Molly, a fashion designer, and Misty, a hairstylist and salon owner, wanted to find an easy way to get beautiful, healthy curls without spending half the morning in front of a mirror. Together, they created the Sway. The Sway curls without heat so it won't damage your hair. It's soft and luxurious and comfortable to sleep in so you can wear it overnight and wake up looking glam. Made in the USA from plush cotton velour or cruelty-free piece silk. It's also a super cute accessory that's available in lots of beautiful colors, so you can put it in and wear it out. I wear this all the time and I wear it out all the time and it never fails. I always get a compliment on one, how cute it looks, and two, people cannot believe that I'm actually curling my hair. It's one of my favorites. I absolutely love it. No matter what type of hair you have, the Sway can help you achieve beautiful, healthy curls with minimal effort so you can spend more time doing what you love with whom you love. The Sway makes a great gift, and Molly and Misty want to offer more than your age listeners a chance to get a great deal. Go to mainelabelhairco.com, that's M-A-N-E, labelhairco.com to get yours today and use the code more than your age at checkout for 10% off your entire order. With lots of great accessories like scalp massagers, brushes, scrunchies, headbands, and more, it's easy to find a gift or something for yourself. So use code more than your age for 10% off today at mainlabelhairco.com. That's MANELABELHAIRCO.com. Abby Snyder, I am very glad to have you on the show today. Welcome to the More Than Your Age podcast.
Thanks. I'm very happy to be joining you.
I'm very excited to have you. Our mutual friend Ashley shared how she thought you would be a great guest for the show. And then based on our previous conversation and what she shared with me, I 100% agree with her. So I've been looking forward to this podcast episode since we spoke. And so I'm just ready to dive in and kind of hear your background. I'd love for you to just start off and share a little bit about your own personal background as far as your work with occupational therapy and why working with children with special needs was such a passion of yours.
Okay. Well, firstly, initially it hadn't been, and I didn't even know what occupational therapy was whenever I entered college. So I was interested in medicine mainly because I'd had a bicycle injury and I fractured my wrist, and then I'd had a sports injury in high school and I had prehab and surgery and then rehab post-op. And so I had some medical things that were really interesting to me. And so I thought medicine, and I leaned towards pre-med, but I'm pretty responsibility averse. And so I thought maybe nursing or nurse practitioner. So I went into nursing, and I started level 1 nursing, and we had clinicals. And well, first of all, nursing school was really, really difficult, and I have the utmost respect for nurses. But for part of our clinical, we were kind of doing activities of daily living with our clients, our patients. And so I was giving a patient a bath in an assisted care facility. And I wasn't married at that point, and I was pretty reserved, so it was really uncomfortable for me. But even more than that, I just thought in this situation, what I really wanted to do was to more partner with my patient and help her to do the things that she could do. And of course, do anything for her, serve her if I needed to. I was happy to do that. But I just thought it was really an opportunity for her to be working on, doing some reaching and doing some things for herself. I just thought it might help her to have a little bit more purpose. And that was OT, and I didn't know it. And then later that week, my clinical instructor, who had a pretty good sense of humor, she said, by the way, I don't know why any of you guys are roughing it here in nursing. My daughter-in-law is in PT school. she's going to graduate in a month and she's going to get $65 an hour for getting people out of bed. And I went home and I looked up PT schools and stuff, but it wasn't, it sounds really cynical. Um, but it just kind of reminded me because, I was already starting to feel like nursing wasn't maybe the best fit. And then it was reminding me that helping people to gain independence was something that was important to me and that I valued it from having had prehab and rehab for a knee injury. So I looked up PT school and I just looked at UCA. That was the nearest one to where I was living. And I looked at PT and I had a lot of the prerequisites. So I thought, well, this would be a pretty smooth transition. But right next to it was occupational therapy or OT, and I'd never heard of it before. And I just clicked on it. And I started seeing a little bit more, I felt like kind of liberal arts mixed in, like a little bit more psych. And there was even one of the classes had like crafts. And I was like, I don't know what this is, but it looked to me to be a little bit more, to me, well-rounded. Now, a PT might not agree, but to me, it just felt like a little bit more well-rounded, maybe for my personality. So I kind of scrambled together and finished the last prerequisites that I needed. And part of it was observing. But I got into the program and it was more competitive than I'd realized at the time. And the Lord really just provided. I wouldn't say that I was any significantly more qualified, than anyone in the group, but there were a lot of people that applied and not all of us got in. And so I just later when I found that out, I thought, well, that was the Lord because, I just found out what this is. So the Lord really provided there. And then again, I was interested in shoulder type rehab for occupational therapy. And my kind of limited understanding at the beginning was that occupational therapy was kind of like physical therapy for the upper body, like shoulder, elbow, wrist, hand rehab. And that was really interesting to me because, like I said, I'd had that bike injury and I had a cast because I'd fractured my wrist. And I just thought that would be really cool. And another thing from my childhood that made it interesting to me was that I wanted to do missions. We had Mission Sunday, like once a month with Miss Emily growing up. And I just really wanted to be a missionary. But I'm an introvert. And so the thought of just going over to be, talking to people and building relationships was intimidating. So I thought medical missions, that's a way where I can do it. And it just makes sense to me. So I can have this functional skill that I can share. So that all kind of came together. But with my schedule, I had planned to get married right before spring break. And so I ended up taking this class that instead of meeting all together, met once a week. And it was called Acts Junior. And it was acting. It was an acronym for Acting Creates Therapeutic Success. And it was an acting program for special needs kids and their peers. And I loved it. And like I said, I took it because it fit my schedule and I needed to have, with it meeting that way, it was going to give me extra time right before we got married and I didn't want to be stressed. So it was, I absolutely loved it. I love the kids. I love the creativity. I love working with them and their siblings. And so that was kind of just it. And I had really, really excellent mentors in the program too. And I would say that they made a really big difference to me because it's one thing to be engaged in a program, but it's another thing to be spurred on. And these women just value integrity and excellence, and they're loving, godly women. They're so intelligent, and they push. They're always pushing to, how can we improve? And it was Krista Tapp and Lynn Holloway and my partner, because they were gracious enough to eventually I was pulled into kind of a student leadership position in this program with the kids. And my partner was Kara Valentine, and they were just amazing. And so I feel like their influence really kind of changed my trajectory. So that's a really, really long answer. Um, but really, I wasn't looking at OT, and didn't really have a lot of experience with children with special needs. I was just kind of prodded and led.
That
So,
I love too how like you were saying that that wasn't the initial goal, and then just kind of like different things happened to make OT happen, and then specifically with kids with special needs, and then these women who served as these mentors that were really just encouraging you, and just like women that you admired and appreciated. And when you took that class specifically, or just in general, do you mind explaining a little bit of what OT is specifically with kids with special needs? Just like, I know that's very broad, but like just some basics so the listener who may not know can understand, including myself.
okay. Um, well, I feel like sometimes if going broad can be kind of getting into theory, so I'll try to keep it concise but make it really practical. And a child receiving occupational therapy or special needs child might happen because either they have a diagnosis, they were born with they had a disability, and the parents and the family and the doctors knew it right off. Or sometimes when parents take their children to checkups and they are like, are you meeting all these milestones? If you're not, then that could be kind of within reason, it could be kind of a red flag. And then the doctor will send a referral for probably OT and PT, occupational therapy, physical therapy, and maybe speech, depending on what's going on. But occupational therapy for kids is going to look like sometimes like PT rehab for, shoulders and elbows and hands. I've done some hand splinting, and type of post-injury therapies. But the other part that OT is really focused on, kind of dealing again with the upper extremity, is fine motor skills. And so, that can be grasping, for younger, smaller kids, grabbing and stacking blocks is kind of the eye-hand coordination. And then there's also a sensory component. So if you or any of your friends or family members have a child and they say, oh, well, this child, he might come up and touch your face because he or she is, sensory seeking, something like that. It's just the way that our senses affect how we interact with the world and how we interpret the world. And so OTs can try to help children kind of, like in that example, create boundaries. Like, we know you want to touch a face because that's what you like to do when you meet people. But let's go to our list. Do you know this person? Do you have their permission? And what is something else you can do? Like maybe ask if you can shake a hand instead. So does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. And so in that situation, like a child who would want to touch somebody's face and you're telling them, okay, well, let's look at our list of the other things that we can do. So shaking hands would be an option. What would be something else that they could be another option that they could do if touching, face or inappropriate touching could occur?
Well, I guess it would go back to the child. So
Okay.
what is motivating for the child? We've had children at the clinic before that, interestingly, they loved vacuums. They loved to hear them. They love to run a vacuum. And so, in a certain situation, that can be motivating. Like, I know you really want to do this. I really appreciate that you're showing maturity and choosing to not do this without their permission because they're uncomfortable. When we get home, I'm going to let you run the vacuum. And that's kind of just kind of a random example, because I didn't have a whole lot of clients who wanted to touch faces,
Okay.
um, I had a few, and which is, it's fine with family, and with permission, but with strangers, it can be an issue. So,
Yeah, no, that's good. I appreciate that because I'm not familiar. I hear OT and I know PT and so I'm not too familiar on what that world looks like, and so that gives me a better idea. So I appreciate that. Well, so you're pursuing this career in occupational therapy, and then I know, and you mentioned you got married during spring break of during that class, and when you and I spoke, you mentioned that you and your husband had put off having biological children to focus and work on things in your marriage. And during this time, too, you had decided to go on a mission trip. I'd love to hear whatever you want to share about how this trip came about, what was special about this trip, and anything else regarding that you want to share.
Okay. Well, in a similar way, that it wasn't, the trip wasn't what we had in mind. It was what I had in mind. Because as I mentioned, I'd always been interested in doing medical missions. And my first job and only job out of OT school was at Children's Therapy Team, in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And when I interviewed, they told me that they do medical mission trips to Ukraine. And so immediately, I was drawn to them. And that was another situation where God just showed me mercy, and He put incredible women in my path. And I don't know, for whatever reason, it's mostly women who are working as pediatric therapists. But anyway, the women were amazing, and I was really interested in going on this trip, and I had graduated and finished my passed the test for my license, I think around August or September. And then an email came out like, hey, this trip, we're planning it for spring next year. We're going to have an informational meeting, and who's interested? Excuse me. So I told my husband about it. But as I told you earlier, he and I were having a very strained marriage. And there wasn't something that I could say, well, this thing happened in our marriage, and so that was what we had to work through. It wasn't like that. It was just like just pervasive tension, arguing. It was just rough, and so we had this tension, and we had just moved from where I had graduated from Central Arkansas to Northwest Arkansas, and we just had these changes going on. And we were trying to save up for a house. And Daniel, my husband, who's a wonderful, godly man, and he's also very responsible. And so we joke that he's the brakes and I'm the gas. So I'm sure lots of relationships and marriages have that. But I was ready to go. I was ready to do anything I could to go on the trip. And it was a week off of work, unpaid. So that was kind of an issue. And Daniel was like, you know what, you're a new grad, maybe next year. But then another email had come up, and I thought I'd just check him again. And I was like, hey, I got this other email. What do you think? There's this informational meeting. He said, okay, you can go. And I was like, how did this happen? So I went to the meeting, and they talked about some of their goals, which was, to work with special needs children and their families in the community in this area of Ukraine, and also to work in the orphanage and to work on educating the caregivers kind of on how to therapeutically interact with the children, and to improve the children's quality of lives, and to show the children and their parents and their caregivers that these children have value. They're important. They're made in the image of God, and we care about them, and that's why we're here. That's why we traveled. And then also in hopes of kind of giving these children a little bit of a leg up, back to my kind of silly example of the child who touches the face. It might be a little bit off-putting if a potential adoptive parent comes to a place and the kid's just, kind of on them. And so if we can help the caregivers and the nannies in that situation to kind of help the children regulate themselves a little bit better, we were also hoping to make them more adoptable, because in Ukraine in particular, I think, which I could be wrong, I could be misremembering, but I think it was kind of like Birth to 7 was the main orphanage where international adoptions could take place, and then after that, it was kind of more like an institution for adults with disabilities or developmental delays, and those were pretty rough. like documentaries have been made about those in Eastern Europe. Not a place where you would want a child to go. So those were kind of the goals, and I came back and I was really excited about it. Even though I was a new grad, a very new grad, and kind of had some tension at home, I was like, I want to do it anyway. So I told Daniel about it, and he said, "Well, that's great. That's great. I think you and I are still on the page for next year." And I was like, "I don't know what you're talking about." I asked him, he said I could go, and I confirmed that I would go. So that was another blow up. But neither of us wanted me to go back and say, "Sorry, I confirmed I can't really." So I went on the trip, and excuse me. And I think that was March of 2010. So I went on the trip. And again, I was a new grad and I had some stressors at home. And I kind of brought with me a little bit of, well, definitely inexperience and, some emotional immaturity. But again, the Lord was so gracious. They were just the leaders from the clinic. One of them was the owner, and another woman who's in an administrative leadership role and fellow therapists. They were wonderful. They're such excellent leaders. They were gentle and they were patient and they loved the kids and they're so intelligent. And they were, just so wise about how they interacted and how they educated. And so it was a really neat opportunity for me to be able to be with them and to serve. So that was, and let's see. I guess I would just say that they were so gracious to let me go, with my inexperience and everything. But Kim Hanna, the owner of Children's Therapy Team, is a physical therapist, and she adopted her daughter, Mira, from this orphanage that was kind of like our home base orphanage. And so she was returning to serve and work. And towards the end, the doctor said, well, we have this little girl that we want to bring out because we don't know what's going on with her. And so they brought out this little girl and she had chicken pox and, she was really small for her age, and they held her and they said, oh, well, she has arthrogryposis, which is a musculoskeletal condition. And they knew immediately what it was. And they said, it's not progressive. It's not life-threatening. And the doctor said, oh, well, we've had her in medical isolation. So, and the environment at the orphanage, I guess I should add a little bit here, is obviously not ideal. Children need families. We're made for a community of families. And in Ukraine, there's the culture there at the time was kind of like a holdover from what the United States culture was from like the 50s. And it was, if this is going on with your child, take them to an institution where they're trained to help them, And also in Ukraine, they don't have any of the supports that we have here. I would say as a whole, from what I experienced, most of the country is not even wheelchair accessible at all. Their lifts are tiny. My daughter, currently her wheelchair could not fit in their lifts. So anyway, just very inaccessible, and they don't have the supports for parents. They don't have Medicaid and things like that. So the parents are actually encouraged to take their children there. So I should say that, I think. And the caregivers there, I would say, some of them are probably there for a job because they need the money. And some of them, I would say, are there because they care about the children. So it's not an ideal place to grow up. And the orphanage would say that too. They would say, we want these children to be adopted. But in particular, children in isolation are going to suffer some psycho-emotional effects from being isolated and having sensory deprivation. And so, and there was actually a term that was thrown about for a while called institutionalized autism. And that would be a child that, in theory, would not have had autism if they hadn't been so sensory deprived from living in an institution.
Wow.
So that's kind of the setup for these. So this little girl who was about 9 months old, that they brought her out, like, what's going on? They said, well, we've had her in medical isolation. And so our team leaders, they were very adamant. They said, no, get her into the special needs room, let her have some more interaction with children. She's going to be okay. This isn't life threatening. And so that was kind of right towards the end of our trip. And then after that, we started getting texts about some volcano in Iceland. And I was like, I don't care. But I ought to have, because it ended up being, it's on Wikipedia. It's a thing, like the 2010 Icelandic volcano eruption. It shut down all flights going east, or for us, sorry, going west across the Atlantic. So, and this was before I didn't have a smartphone. And so all of a sudden I had to contact my husband, who didn't want me to be on the trip because, it was anyway. And I was like, so what's your second grade teacher's name? Because I need to max out this emergency credit card because we're going to go to Dubai and Sydney and LA and then Tulsa to get home
Oh my gosh.
because all the flights are shut down. So, it was really stressful, and I hate flying, by the way. Like, absolutely hate it. I'm petrified. I'm just not a good flyer. So that was something, coming home to that. But like the Lord does, He used this extremely stressful situation. And so, like, when I got home for Daniel, that was like the straw on the camel's back, and he was like, "We're going to counseling." And I thought that people went to marriage counseling if they were going to get a divorce. And I was like, I kind of thought we were okay limping along, but he looks to improve. I appreciate that in other people who are, ambitious and they're looking to improve. So we went to marriage counseling through the Joshua Center, which is a Christian counseling center in Northwest Arkansas. And the Lord used it to heal our marriage. And it wasn't perfect when we were through with therapy, and it isn't perfect now, but it gave me such hope that the Lord is faithful, and he'll meet us. And if the Lord could heal our marriage at that point, which was just so wretched, it just gave me faith. If He can do that, what else can He do? So that was kind of the end of the mission trip.
Wow. I'm thankful to hear too that you said the Joshua Project, is that
The Joshua Center.
Joshua Center? Okay. I'm thankful to hear that was such a helpful resource for you guys. And like you said, not perfect, but it helped you. Because it's really necessary and important. Now, you come back and then you guys continue to work on your marriage, and you at some point too, this desire to adopt your daughter comes about because you met her on the mission trip. So how did this actually come to fruition? What were conversations like with your husband? Because you had met her, but he hadn't. Like, how did that all play out?
And I should say, he is an amazing man to go through the lengths that he and I did to adopt her without having met her. My husband Daniel is an amazing man. So after marriage counseling, I ended up going on another teamwork. So that's the organization with Children's Therapy Team, where we did the medical missions to Guatemala. And then the group was going to do kind of another kind of a unique trip back to Ukraine. And it was going to be 2 speech and language pathologists or speech therapists and a local couple, Matt and Jenny Mooney. And I don't know if you've heard of them before, but they're the founders of 99 Balloons, which is a disability ministry. And they have a really, really amazing story. And it's not mine to tell, but they're an amazing family. And so I would encourage anyone to look up 99 Balloons. It's a great organization. They're amazing people. But they were actually going to Ukraine to meet their daughter, Lena, who I'm pretty sure they had learned about from our TeamWorks trips, because we handed out pictures of the children that we'd met, and we were like, pray for them. They need a family. And so Matt and Jenny, my understanding is that they were praying and they were hoping that a family would adopt her, and nobody came forward. So they did it. So they were going to meet their daughter for the first time. But I had just gone to Guatemala, so I kind of figured that was off the table for me, but I wanted to go back to Ukraine. And so I prayed. I said, God, if if it's your will, I really, really want to go. And I didn't want anyone to not get to go, in my place. I didn't want to go in their place, but I just really wanted to go. I was thinking, if someone last minute was like, my sister's eloping, I have to go to a wedding. That's what I had in mind. Um, but that didn't happen exactly. But one of the speech therapists started getting headaches, which was kind of concerning because they were just recurring and not stopping. And she went to the doctor and they were like, we don't know what's going on. I think they did some tests and they weren't concerned that it was life threatening. They were just like, this is kind of odd. And and that was Carmen Shumpert. And she was really, really, in my eyes, just so mature and humble about it because she kind of looked at it like, I'm not going to be able to serve to the best of my abilities. So she said, if this doesn't get better, can we have someone, on board to go in my place? And they contacted me. And I told Daniel about it and he said, well, of course you're going. And he was like, but you need to tell me the next time you start praying about something like this. So, anyway, sadly for Carmen, her headaches were still there, so I went on the trip. But she had a childhood illness called Fitz disease that can give a person bad headaches, and those that usually lasts like a week or two, but hers lasted a month.
Oh,
So it
wow.
wasn't anything serious, and it allowed me to go on this trip. And so I went, like I said, with the Moonies, where they were meeting their daughter. And I went with Amy Love Smith, the lead speech pathologist at the clinic, and we saw it was kind of like our first trip. We saw some families in the community, and so we would I would fit them maybe for hand orthotics or some therapy equipment, and Amy would evaluate their speech. And it was another way that God just really provided. Amy was such an amazing leader. She's so intelligent and she's so gracious, and she just has this like authority about her. You don't think of her that way, if that makes sense, because she's not authoritarian at all. But anyway, she's just such a good leader. And on our trip, she said, "Oh, we're going to ask them about that little girl that we saw, that little girl with arthrogryposis." Because before we had left for the trip, the owner of the clinic, Kim Hanna, had sent out a group text with a picture of that little girl. Her name was Anastasia, and they called her Nastia, and it just said "still in isolation." And so she said, we're going to follow up on that. And a little side note, when I got that text, I forwarded it to Daniel and I said, we could adopt her. And we had never talked about adopting before. So I just kind of
Wow.
threw a little wrench in our plans because we were planning on having biological children when we were like 28 years old. For some reason, that was the number. We were like, 28, we're going to do this. So anyway, I was like, oh yeah, we want to see her. So Amy made it happen that we saw this little girl, and she was in the medical isolation area, and they didn't really want us to see her because they didn't want her to get anything because she's going to have a compromised immune system if she's been in isolation. So we masked up and gloved up and everything, and we saw her. But then the orphanage directors, I think it was his wife, she said they need to see her more. And so we saw her later the next day, kind of in like an area with mats. So it was kind of like their gym. And Amy held her and she was trying to, play and get her kind of used to us because Nastia, this little girl, was so afraid of new environments and new people because her world was so small.
Yeah.
It would have just been, I mean, I don't know how many people would have been on shifts, but really, really small. And she lived in a crib, like 24/7. So she was pretty fearful, but Amy has a really gentle spirit about her, and Amy held her, and she kind of calmed down. And then we were playing some and getting her to laugh. And I'm not a real like baby person. I'm not like, let me hold your baby. That's just not my personality. But I said, Amy, can I hold her? And she said, of course. And when I held her, Erica, she just fit. And
Hmm.
it was like something you would hearing a song or something cheesy like Love at First Sight. I mean, it was just, she fit, and I loved her. I felt protective of her, and I wanted to be her mom. Um, anyway, so that happened. And then I finished up my leg of the trip and everything, and then we got home. And I told Daniel, I said, that little girl that I sent you that picture of, Nastia, I want to adopt her. It's like, I think she has so much potential. And I think it's, she's not going to reach it in an orphanage, and we could do it. And he was like, hold on. That's not part of our plan. He's a planner, which is good. We need a planner. He's like, that's not part of the plan. He was like, and by the way, we're in this, really big 3-story fixer-upper right by the university that you said was your dream home, that we're like cashed out basically to try and renovate this thing, which it was. It was my idea. And I was like, that's our forever home. It was like, it was on an acre. It was so awesome. Had these nooks and crannies. And I was like, we're going to grow old in this house. And there's not a bedroom on the first floor. All the bedrooms were on the second floor and the third floor. And he was like, it's not a fit for us. So I nagged him a little bit. I tried not to, but I know I did. And he was like, you got to leave me alone about it. He was like, I don't know this little girl. It's not part of our plan. It's just, that's probably not for us as far as I know. So I prayed again. I prayed that God would give Daniel a dream of a baby in a basket. I prayed that specifically, and I said, because that'll be really obvious, and we'll both know that it's your will, Lord, for us to adopt her. So I prayed that, and that didn't happen. But what did happen is that I had a dream. And I had a dream that we were in this room in the orphanage that I hadn't been in before, and Daniel was holding this little girl, Nastia, and he was holding her kind of up here on his chest, and he was standing with her and patting her back, and he said, can you believe we almost didn't get her? And that was my dream.
Wow.
And I woke up, and I felt very confident that was from the Lord, because if I had been writing it, I would have been holding her. So I was like, this is from God. And so that dream, with me looking back and remembering different times that the Lord had provided and that he had been so faithful, I was just like, okay, I have to let this go. And so I did. And then in a really commonplace conversation that Daniel had with a guy at church, his name was Kendall Byers, and Daniel's kind of closed off. It was against his nature to kind of talk about something personal. But that guy was like, what's going on with your life? I'm Kendall. We haven't met. And and Daniel was like, well, since you're asking, this is what's going on. And Kendall said, sometimes God's just not really specific with us. Sometimes he just kind of leads us in a direction. And that was it. Like all these reasons that I gave why we should do it, that was it. And Daniel came home and he was like, I think we're supposed to adopt this girl.
Whoa.
Yeah. So we went through all the paperwork and we did all the things. And as I was going through the paperwork and kind of getting in touch with some people to try and make that happen, I found out that about a month before I came back to Ukraine the second time and held Eva and just fell, Eva now, Nastia, and fell in love with her, that another family had been there and they had completed all of their paperwork and all of their process, and they had been there to adopt Eva and this other little boy. But because her kind of sensory and attachment needs were so great, they had to make this really hard decision to not adopt her and to only adopt the little boy. So that was a month before I saw her. And so I really feel like, again, that my dream was from the Lord, because we almost didn't get her. I mean, that family had been saving and praying about this little girl for months. And then they had to, in country, in Ukraine, they had to say, this is beyond our capacity. So, and the mother of the family contacted me later and we talked some. So
wow.
I knew about that.
So when you went back the second time and you held her, how old was she at that time? And then my follow-up question to that too is, then when you came back and the time had passed where you were talking with your husband and then he finally, he said, okay, let's do it. And then you adopted her. What was that time frame? So first, how old was she when you went back the second time, if you remember, and then kind of the timeline after that?
I think she was around, I think she had turned 2 that June. And then I was there like in October.
Okay.
So that was the second trip. So June to October is nearly 2.5.
Hmm.
And then when we adopted her, she was about 3.5 when we were able to complete her adoption. And we had to stay in Ukraine for 2 months as part of that.
Oh.
So Daniel stayed for, I think, like the first month, and then he had to go back home for work, and then I stayed the whole time. So, so she was three
Okay.
and a half when we got home.
Now, because she had been in such isolation for her life, I mean, most of her life, if not all of it, when you did get to take her home and you were on an airplane, I mean, how did she respond to that? And I would imagine that would have been very challenging.
It was, but the thing about Eva is still today is that which we changed her name. We named her Evelina Claire after my gran because she hung the moon. So we wanted to give her a family name. I think a lot of people have strong opinions about keeping a child's name or changing a child's name either way, but we prayed about it and we gave her a family name. So and also I guess we felt like Nastia didn't translate very well, to so we had Eva on the plane, and she actually did okay on the plane. So with her condition, arthrogryposis for her, what that means is that she has multiple joint contractures, and I think more than 4 joints, I think is the criterion for the diagnosis. But basically, her elbows and her knees, this is oversimplification, but they don't bend very much at all. So whenever I was getting her in and off the plane, I was holding her and her legs were out my sides and her feet would hit people's heads. Like every time we would go by, I would just give them a bump. And obviously I didn't mean to, and it did hurt her. She might have even laughed. But it was tricky. That part was tricky. And then for another leg of it, we were in a van going from a more southern Donetsk region of Ukraine to Kiev, to the capital, and she was just kind of stimming, like doing some stimulation, and she was just going, like the whole time. And I just let her do it because, I mean, what else was I gonna do? So I just let her do it, and I listened to music. So it wasn't as bad as it could have been. So
Yeah. Well, and two, I would imagine that because you um, have had experience working with children with special needs like that, those noises aren't foreign to you. They may be foreign to somebody else, but and you kind of knew what to do. Well, okay, so I want to jump forward a little bit just due to some time. So you and your husband ended up adopting another little girl as well. So you have 2 daughters. And at some point, too, y'all decide to leave. I'm assuming you decided to leave this dream home right when you got Eva, but y'all left, and then now you're on this farm. Um, that was a big transition and change. And why a farm specifically, and what was so beneficial about being there, and specifically with your daughters?
well, yes, you're right. We had to leave the dream home by the university because it's not accessible. But that ended up being a great thing because we used the finances from that to finance Audrey's adoption, our second daughter that we adopted, who's actually older than our daughter we adopted first, Eva. So having been by the university, it was kind of loud and kind of wild at times, and so we were ready for quiet. And I'm from the Fort Smith area. That was kind of my hometown, but we lived outside of city limits, so we had a Fort Smith address, but we were kind of out in the country. And my husband had lived in suburbs of Fort Worth, like Keller and Grapevine kind of area. So he was used to that. But I was thinking it'd be great for us if it was quiet and we were in the country. And that was another thing that I was ready for first, and he was not ready for a while. But at one point, I guess he got tired of it being loud too. So we were like, okay, let's move to the country. And we weren't even really thinking about farming because where we are is about 40 to 45 minutes outside of Fayetteville. So my husband has a commute for work and he works full time. At that point, I was staying home with the girls. I was so busy with the girls. I never thought we would farm. I just thought we're going to be out in the country where it's peaceful and it's quiet. But then as the girls started maturing and I felt, safe with like all the circumstances in the house that I could step outside, while they're fine, while they're reading or doing an activity and I could step out some, I was ready to add some animals. And Daniel, my husband, again, he's like this bigger thinker than I am. He was thinking, what could we do for our girls that would be kind of like a legacy? And so could we view, because I was thinking like hobby farming, and he was like, well, what if we take this to a level so that it's something that will be available for them that they can utilize possibly for income, when they're adults, older adults, and whatever. So we started small. We started with some chickens, and people say that's the gateway drug for hobby farming. So we went from chickens, and then we got some ducks and a couple geese, and then baby doll sheep. And I would be the first to say we're not true farmers. I'm not vegan, and I don't have a problem with people eating meat, but I am not to the point where I can raise animals to be harvested. I'm just not. I'm too much of a bleeding heart. So we're doing baby doll sheep because people keep them as pets in this area. So yeah, so we have farming, and it's been a lot of buying like how to do all this books and videos to try and find out what to do when this bizarre thing happens, like your baby doll sheep ingests a sock that she dug up from the ground. So I guess that's the other thing, is that we're kind of trying to rehabilitate the land that we're on, because part of it was a farm and part of it had kind of been like a dumping ground a little bit. Like there were two motorless boats. Anyway, we've been doing a lot of cleaning, but the rain and the rocks are going to come up and they bring up trash. So I was literally like
Hmm.
Googling, what do you do if your sheep ingest clothing? Like anyway, it's been, that part's been fun. Somewhat stressful, but fun.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, one of the things when you and I spoke before, you shared with me that you never really intended to stay home, or this wasn't really something that you would have chosen to do, but because you're with the girls and you can create your own rest schedule and just being able to help them, that just like the slow living, the own schedule has really helped transform their IQ and their overall well-being. Why do you think that is the case? And I'd love to hear just like some of the changes, like the positive changes in both your girls that you've seen within like developmentally, intellectually, just whatever you want to share with that.
Okay. Well, I would need to say that it wasn't my idea to do that. I can't take credit for it. That was COVID.
Mm.
We had been driving 40 to 45 minutes one way into town at least 3 times a week for therapies and for, miscellaneous doctors and specialist appointments. And then COVID put a stop to that. The girl's longtime PT was coming to the house 1 or 2 times a week to do PT for the girls, but that was it. We were just kind of hunkered down because with their diagnosis, they have lower muscle tones. They don't have strong coughs. They're kind of at risk for respiratory complications. So we hunkered down, and I was really worried actually that the opposite would happen, that they were going to have a lot of regression because they have been so dependent on the schedule. And especially our youngest daughter is very, very, can very much obsess about schedules and routines and changes. And it might have been stressful for a little bit, and there might have been a little bit of regression, but none of it was long lasting. And again, the Lord used something that was, I mean, it was bad. COVID was bad. Nobody wanted it. But just the slow pace allowed us time for quiet reading in the morning, and the girls will read their Bible and they'll read a fiction book or or maybe Audrey will read history or something too. She's not always into fiction. But just the slow and the quiet and the reading and not being, again, I think there's that idea of being stimulated and overstimulated. I think we were too busy and we were overstimulated, and the girls were not stopping and really engaging their focus and their interests. And so once we kind of got into a really slow rhythm, I noticed that their reading and their conversation, their reading comprehension, and then their conversation just gained this new depth that I had never heard from either of them. And they're bright girls, and they can really catch you off guard. They've always been that way with their insights. But it was just so much deeper, like a deeper level of understanding, and then and more reflection. And so, in fact, over this time, which our youngest daughter is pretty young developmentally. I should say the girls are going to be 15 and 16 this year. But developmentally, she's pretty young. But over COVID, she really started to reflect, and she said, "Mama, I want to stay home with you when I'm an adult." And we had planned on that anyway, but it was a really, really different thing altogether for her to put the pieces together, that her life plan might look different from what we see, like what we read in books and what we see on movies. It might not be that way. And she wanted to know, that we were going to be working towards that. And that can maybe sound counterproductive for some people, because I think the push for independence is big, especially with special needs children. But there's, in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with us, being a family and Eva staying with us. I mean, we adopted her. We chose to do that, knowing that there was a chance that she would be with us, and we enjoy her company. She's a delight. And so, I guess just for that to sink in, and for her to gain that maturity and that understanding was really kind of remarkable. And also her attachment, which had always been kind of a challenge, from her background, just became so secure. So if I had an appointment and my mom was with the girls, Eva used to cry, just separation anxiety. She doesn't do that now. She just feels so much more grounded and secure. And in her conversations with other people, it's a lot less sounding rote and and scripted. She's engaged, and it's anyway, for Eva, it was some of the most dramatic changes. And then for my daughter Audrey, she took the time to be able to go from, let's see, her academics and everything really improved. And she got to the point where she felt so confident in her academics that we moved a lot more into art. And so she's taken up a lot of really neat art things, embroidery, and she's extraordinarily skilled. And I think it would surprise people when they see her work to know that she has special needs and that she's doing it with really limited range of motion.
Wow.
So,
well, that's a huge testament to your skills and your ability and your patience and the work that you've done with your children. Just knowing, I know unfortunately we didn't really hear too much of Audrey's story, but with Eva, just knowing that she was in isolation, and, I can imagine all of that entails, and the fact that now they're helping you, and Audrey's doing art, and even with you saying that Eva was wanting to be with you as an adult. And also the thing that I was just like so in awe of you, Abby, in this section of your story, is that you're saying, well, the plan, we chose to adopt them. Like the plan is, of course we're going to continue to care for them as adults. When I feel like so many people are like, okay, 18 and out, and you're just very selfless, like incredibly selfless, that it's just really encouraging to hear that. And I think I shared with you too before that it's very inspiring to meet somebody who is willingly choosing to adopt children with special needs when a lot of people do not want to have those children and choose to do other things, whether they give them up or they, choose to end life. And I think that, like, just the fact that you and your husband have chosen this life to care for these two children. I know there's so many other things a part of your story as well, but I'm very inspired by you. And I think, there's just something special about you. And so I thank you so much for sharing just this part of the story with us. I wanted to kind of go and share a little bit about your art and your pottery and your book. We don't have that much time left, but we can, if you want to say anything about your children's book and your pottery, and then I have two more questions that I really want to hear your thoughts to before we let you go. So feel free to share about your children's book and your pottery.
Okay, well, thank you for your kind words. Thank you, Erica. Um, so I wrote a book. Again, it wasn't my idea. It was Daniel's idea. He's ambitious for me. I'm not ambitious. I'm just kind of like, I do my thing. I wrote a book and I wrote it several years before COVID. It was kind of like I lost a bet and I had to write the book. There are details, they don't matter. Anyway, I wrote the book. I didn't think it was great. And then COVID happened and I had slowed down. Besides the girls having slowed down, I did too. And so I finished the book. I edited a lot and I sent it off, and I'm working with my sister, who's an AP Chem teacher. I mean, she's full time. She works, but she and my husband have this in common that I really admire. They're those like type A people who are also artistic. I'm like, where did this come from? How did you get that? But she's doing the art and I'm really excited about it. But I did that because I lost the bet. I told Danielle I would. But the main point of it, I added some silly things for Eva, like sneezes, because she thinks they're funny. And I added some sophisticated things for Audrey, because she's our fancy daughter. But the point of the book also, because I can't do something without a function, was to be a vocab builder. So I had found with my children having developmental delays and being ESL learners, I had found kind of a way to introduce new words because they're not using context clues. My children weren't. The context clues were not helpful because there was enough weight on their minds already just getting the words that are supposed to be context. Anyway, so I have this little kind of, it's not gimmicky, but I have this little thing that I do. I replace the unknown word with a word they know, even when I'm reading to them out loud, because we read out loud nearly every night. Like if the word is exit, I would say go, exit. I just kind of insert it before the word. Anyway, that was what I did for that book, is try to introduce that to build vocab for novel words. And some of the words are kind of big because I love it whenever young children use large words. I think it's hilarious and refreshing. So that was the book. And then again with the slowdown with COVID, it was like just this creative part of my brain, I guess, just kind of came out because it had been stifled with busy schedules. And I started doing pottery. And my grandmother, who's Eva's namesake, is an art teacher, or she was when she was living. So she was an artist, and her best friend for years was a potter. And so I'd kind of been around pottery, but had never really done it, except for like as a craft thing, like never done it. But I just decided I was going to do it. And so I did, and Daniel drove way out to Oklahoma and found me a used 30-year-old, like, great brand of a kiln. Anyway, so I started doing pottery. And I actually made a couple of adaptive pieces for Eva for the dinner table. So it's been, again, there's been some function, but I really, during all the stuff with COVID, there was so much division in the church and in families and even in friends with this team or that team, with everything, politics, whatever. And it really weighed on my heart. And so I had this idea of making pieces that brought people together. That was my humble ambition, is that I could make, I'm an espresso drinker, but espresso cups or larger cups or whatever, and I make tea sets too. And I had this idea to call them Unity Wear before I'd even made that many pieces. And it was, it kind of going back to Paul, and it was, let our conversations when we come together, not be about people or what's dividing us, but what's true and noble and praiseworthy and excellent. And then later, useful for building up. I just thought if we could do that, we don't have to have lobotomies and all, agree with each other on everything. We can disagree in love. and we can talk about things that are important and not pointless arguments. So that's where it came from. And then it just kind of grew. And a girl from my hometown, or a woman, she's a woman now, a mother, a grown up, a real grown up. Sometimes I forget that I'm a grown up. She's not a girl. Uh, she's a year younger than I am in school, but she has an awesome store in downtown Fort Smith on Garrison, like where the Westerns are set and some of the old movies and stuff, like really cool place. And she has such a great eye. Her name is Sarah. And this is awful, but I don't remember her married name. But she goes by Sarah Louise with her design because that's her middle name. And the store is Lux House, and it's downtown. And it's her. She's such a great curator. And so I contacted her, and she was so gracious. She was like, "Yeah, yeah, let's partner with this." So my pottery is there, and she's really doing me a kindness. And it's just such an honor because I look at her store and I'm like, "Ah, I cannot believe my pottery is in the store. It's so cool." Anyway, so that's how pottery happened.
I
Wasn't
love
planning on
it.
it either. Kind of happened. So,
What's the name of your book?
the book is going to be Sibby Cat, and there might be a subtitle.
Okay.
But I don't know if you saw the cat climbing on my lap,
Yeah.
but she's still here. She's actually being quiet. Good for her. But she is the main character. So,
Wonderful. So that's in progress, and then your pottery. I know you have an Instagram for your pottery, and I'll put that in the show notes for you and for any folks in Fayetteville. They need to stop by that shop. Okay, so my last two questions for you. I really just want to. I know, like right before I asked you about the children's book and the pottery, I was just talking about how I appreciate that you chose this life of choosing to adopt these girls with special needs when a lot of people would not even want to do that. I'd love to hear just any type of encouragement you could provide for someone who might be considering adoption and to anyone who may not have ever considered adopting children with special needs. Anything that you could share with them?
um, I would say that a lot of times I'm kind of tend to be path of least resistance, like, oh yeah, okay, we'll just kind of go along and do this. And maybe some other people are like that. And what I would say, for I don't know if it's exactly encouragement or exhorting, but adoption can be your first choice. Um, it's full of surprising joys. It is not easy, but you know what? Relationships aren't easy anyway. I mean, what's harder than being a spouse or, a child and then a parent? It's just relationships are difficult. They're good and they're beautiful and they're difficult. And it's the same thing with having a parent-child relationship with a special needs child. That part is the same, beautiful. And I would say that if you are interested, feel free to contact me or any other special needs parent that you know. I'm sure they would love to, meet and answer questions if you have specific questions. And then as far as adoptions go, there are grants. And so international adoption can be kind of daunting because of the financing involved, but there are grants. It is doable. And a couple doesn't have to be walking in perfection or be amazing to do this. I feel like the biggest thing is being obedient, and then whatever you need to do, because I mean disability does affect our everyday life. I mean it does. I can't say that it doesn't, but the Lord provides like manna, what we need for the day. And I would just say that I feel like from my friends who are mothers of typically developing children, I feel like the biggest difference to me is that, some of our expectations for our children are different and the milestones we celebrate are different. But other than that, and besides you become entrenched in this world that if it wasn't your background, you would have never known anything about. You get all this new like dialogue and everything and specialists and all that. There are those kinds of extras, but um, it just feels very natural to me. I cannot imagine having any other children. Um, And I would say if anyone feels led or is interested, pray about it. Read The Connected Child. I think any adoptive parent, that's an excellent, excellent resource for any parent with attachment. I didn't our first adoption, and we all paid for it. I thought I knew what I was getting into, and I didn't. So like 6 months in, I did, and but like I said, the Lord is gracious. There was grace in when I made mistakes, and Eva was just so patient with me even. So yeah, contact someone who knows, and I would recommend that book, the Connected Child.
Yeah, it's a great answer. And I really like how you said, too, that adoption can be the first choice. Is a very beautiful answer with that. Well, Abby, my last question, this is the question I like to ask everybody. Um, so, the podcast really is all about being more than your age, more than your life situation or circumstance, whether you choose something or you don't choose something. And like we said, this is a life that you did choose. And I like too how when we spoke, you were like, I don't know if I'm like the best fit because I'm not like this ambitious or whatever, like things just kind of happen. And I was like, well, no, I want that too, because you're doing an amazing job at the life that you're given and this life that you did choose to have these two beautiful daughters. And so the last question for you, if you could encourage one woman who does feel blocked or limited to pursue a dream or a goal based on her age or her life circumstance, what would you tell her?
Well, I would have to say that in the vast majority of cases or circumstances, being told that your age or your life circumstances are going to prevent you from this dream, I would say that that's a lie from the enemy of our souls, and it doesn't matter who it comes from. I would say that in the vast majority of circumstances, that's a lie. I think that these desires, like when I was telling my parents that we were thinking about adopting Eva way, years ago, I said my biggest fear is that she's supposed to be someone else's daughter, and I'm coveting. I'm trying to go after something that's not mine. And my dad, and he's probably the wisest person I know. He just said, that desire is from the Lord. He was like, what you're aiming to do is a good thing. There's nothing in the Bible that that says that that's bad or selfish. What you're doing is a good thing, and that desire is from the Lord. That's a non-issue. So I guess I would look at ambitions in our hearts, that's from the Lord. He made us with purpose, and pursue it. And if there are roadblocks, you pray. And if things happen in your life and you change your mind, or circumstances happen in such a way that it's you feel like it's a true block, then it's a pivot. I mean, a lot of my path has just been like that game where you drop the little disc thing and it pops between the things.
Like Plinko?
Yes. It's people use, I mean, pivot may be overused these days, but that's what we do, isn't it? We pursue, and then we wait on the Lord, but we do our part, and we do the pursuing, and then sometimes we adjust. But I would also say, don't ever let anybody tell you what to do or what you can't do, unless they're a professional, unless you're seeking godly counsel and someone you trust and they build trust with you, or they're a professional in the field and you really trust them. But otherwise, who are they to tell you you can't do something? I don't know about that.
Well, Abby, you have such a pure heart. I just really appreciate you taking the time and sharing part of your story, and just the kindness that you exude. I just have learned so much in this one little conversation. So thank you so much for joining me today on the More Than Your Age podcast.
I'm honored, and thanks again for your kind words, Erica. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.